The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the early morning air of Redwood Hollow Wildlife Sanctuary's veterinary wing. Everything had gone smoothly until a gasp shattered the silence. "Meredith, there's another one." Dr. Meredith Lane turned. In the assistant's trembling hands was something impossibly small, so fragile it seemed more dream than life. Outside, dew still clung to the tall redwoods, and the fog hadn't yet lifted from the forest floor. But inside the Wildlife Sanctuary's vet room, time had stopped. The sixth kitten had arrived, long after the fifth. The other cubs were healthy and mewling softly in the corner under warm lamps. But this one didn't move. No heartbeat was visible. No breath clouded the tiny oxygen dome. The monitors stayed silent. The creature, barely the size of a quail egg, lay lifeless, its skin almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface like spider silk in a web. Dr. Meredith Lane, 47, had delivered hundreds of wild births in her 2-decade career. She had seen her share of loss and knew when to let go. But something about this kitten made her hesitate. She knelt beside it, instinct overriding routine. Juniper, the mother bobcat, had endured more than most, rescued from an illegal trapline in northern Alberta, her body scarred, her trust hard-earned. Yet she had carried 6 lives inside her with astounding strength, and now, the last of them lay between life and death. The kitten weighed just 62 grams, less than 1/3 the minimum viable weight for a bobcat newborn. Statistically, medically, biologically, it should not have survived the birth canal, let alone life outside the womb. The official veterinary guide offered no protocols for a case like this. Meredith's mind raced. The data said, "Let go." The instinct said, "Try." She whispered aloud, not knowing to whom, herself, the kitten, or Juniper, watching through the glass. "If you made it this far, then we fight." In a matter of minutes, the team sprang into motion. A neonatal incubator designed for rodents was sterilized and prepared. A micro-oxygen line was fed gently toward the kitten's tiny nose. The room, moments ago calm and clinical, turned into a war zone of controlled urgency. They named her Nova, after the burst of light that marks the end of a dying star. But maybe this was the beginning. Juniper's eyes followed every motion through the glass partition. Isabel Yoon, the sanctuary's lead behaviorist, made quiet notes. Juniper was calm, too calm, not the panic of an animal sensing loss, but the alert stillness of a mother watching a fragile hope cling to life. Just after 4 a.m., the numbers on the heart monitor plummeted. Flatline. Silence. The team froze. No one breathed. Meredith didn't wait. With surgical precision, she extracted a microdose of a cardiac stimulant, no larger than a dewdrop, and injected it into Nova's chest. The syringe was thinner than a sewing needle. Her hands were impossibly steady. The seconds stretched, each one loud with expectation. 5, 10, 20. A blip. Then another. And then, impossibly, a faint but steady beep. Beep. Beep returned to the screen. Nova was back. Meredith sat down slowly, her gloved hands shaking. She had been through trauma wards, emergency surgeries, and once stitched a fractured eagle mid-flight rescue. But nothing had ever left her this shaken. The room didn't cheer. No one clapped. The moment felt too sacred for celebration. Lucas Taylor, the young tech, leaned against the counter and whispered, "She's a fighter." Nova's breathing steadied, weak but rhythmic. She nestled slightly into the heated gauze, as if acknowledging she wasn't done yet. Outside, the sky began to lighten. Rays of morning sun filtered through the trees, brushing the clinic window with gold. Inside, Nova's vitals flickered steadily on the screen. She had made it through her first night. But everyone knew. this was only the beginning. The fight for Nova's life had just begun. Against time, against biology, and against every rule science had written, Nova wasn't supposed to last past sunrise. No record existed of a bobcat kitten surviving at such a low birth weight. But now, at 36 hours old, she was not just alive, she was fighting. The vet room at Redwood Hollow no longer resembled a wildlife sanctuary facility. In under 2 days, it had been transformed into a neonatal intensive care unit. Blank charts now brimmed with vitals, feeding intervals, and emergency protocols. Warm light glowed from a makeshift incubator. A whiteboard beside it read, Nova, 62 grams to 65 grams, fighting. Outside, volunteers moved quietly through the morning mist, unsure if today would be a breakthrough, or a goodbye. Dr. Meredith Lane barely left the room. The deep lines under her eyes spoke of 2 sleepless nights, but her hands remained precise and calm. Joining her was Dr. Calvin Reeves, 68, a retired wildlife physiology professor from British Columbia. He stood silently near the incubator, glasses reflecting the green light of monitors. He had studied bobcats his entire career, but he had never seen one like this. Lucas Taylor, the tech who had inserted Nova's gastric line, now operated on autopilot, charting every feed, adjusting temperature, calibrating machines. And Isabel Yoon, the behaviorist, remained focused not on Nova, but on Juniper. Nova could not suckle. Her jaw muscles were underdeveloped. Feeding her with a syringe was impossible. She aspirated every time. So Lucas devised a system using ultra-thin tubing typically used for lab mice. Each drop of nutrient-rich milk was timed, heated, and infused through a line thinner than a human hair. Meanwhile, Juniper had grown increasingly agitated. She circled her den, searching. She refused full meals. She paced near the door of the veterinary wing. "She knows," Isabel whispered. "She's not moving on." Every textbook said a bobcat would abandon a weak offspring, but Juniper hadn't. To soothe her, the team began delivering cloths with Nova's scent to Juniper's enclosure. What happened next was unlike anything Isabel had ever seen. Juniper gently licked the cloth, then placed it beside her 5 healthy cubs, over and over again, as if trying to integrate the missing child into the group. Meredith observed in silence. "This isn't instinct," she murmured. "This is intention." Back in the ICU, Nova's heartbeat had steadied, but she still didn't respond to external touch. Meredith noted it bluntly in her log. Vitals stable, no sensory engagement, prognosis still critical. Just before midnight on the 4th night, the high-pitched alarm rang out. Nova's heart rate dropped, breathing, shallow, oxygen saturation, 61%. The team rushed in. Lucas cleared the line. Meredith prepped a second emergency stimulant dose. Calvan adjusted the incubator pressure. No one spoke. Meredith administered the injection. 30 seconds passed, then 40, then 60. Beep, beep, beep. The weak but steady rhythm returned. Outside the window, the wind rustled the tall trees. Inside, the team remained frozen for another moment, as if daring not to trust the miracle. Nova had survived her second cardiac episode in 4 days. "She doesn't quit," Calvin muttered. "Neither should we." The next morning, the sanctuary issued its first public update. A critically premature bobcat kitten named Nova is alive, fighting, and showing signs of neural response. The post included a photo of Nova curled in gauze inside Meredith's palm. It went viral within hours. Offers of help poured in. Specialized equipment, neonatal fluid processors, funding for custom devices. Hashtags like #NovaRises and #TinyFighter began trending on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, Juniper continued her silent vigil, responding only to Nova's scent. One afternoon, Isabel arrived with a fresh cloth. Juniper took it, nuzzled it, and laid down, her eyes closing for the first time in days. "I think," Isabel whispered, "it's time." Meredith stared at Nova, barely over 70 grams now, but alert for the first time. A plan formed. If Juniper and Nova still recognized each other after all this, then maybe, just maybe, their bond could do what machines could not. A reunion was coming. The incubator door clicked shut, and silence fell. On one side of the glass, Nova lay motionless, her heartbeat a soft beep on the monitor. On the other side, Juniper stood, completely still. Then, for the first time in 6 days, the mother bobcat let out a sound so soft, so primal, it made every human in the room forget to breathe. The reunion room had been prepared like an operating theater, sterile, quiet, controlled. A glass barrier separated the cub from direct contact, but scent could travel freely. Meredith had requested soft ambient lighting and zero background noise, no sudden movement. Only Isabel and Meredith were allowed inside, both seated quietly behind protective shielding. Juniper was brought in from the far end of the enclosure, accompanied by 2 of her gentlest cubs. They had been chosen for their calm temperaments and low competitive drive. Nova, though stable, remained fragile, too fragile to be exposed to open contact. The clear-sided incubator would serve as both cradle and barrier. Juniper entered first, slow and alert. Her eyes scanned the space, pausing when she saw the incubator. She didn't approach. Not yet. Meredith held her breath, every nerve on edge. Nova, only days old, stirred slightly at the change in light and scent. Isabel whispered into her recorder. Juniper's pupils dilated, breath slowed. Recognition? No one dared speak louder. Then, it happened. Juniper approached. For the past 6 days, everything had revolved around machines, feeding tubes, warming pads, oxygen levels, but no technology could replicate what was unfolding: instinct, emotion, bond. Would Juniper accept Nova again, or reject her as something unnatural? Would Nova even respond? If this failed, it could break Juniper's stability and set Nova's development back days. Juniper reached the incubator and pressed her nose gently against the glass. She let out that same low, maternal trill, a sound Isabel had only heard once before, when Juniper first gave birth. Inside, Nova twitched. It was slight, a shiver, a shift of the head, but it was response. Then, a sound, faint, inaudible to the cameras, but Meredith's trained ear caught it. Nova answered, a squeak, a fragment of a call. It wasn't instinct, it was memory. The room froze as mother and daughter exchanged the oldest language in the animal kingdom: recognition. For 10 full minutes, Juniper remained pressed against the incubator. She nuzzled the outer glass, licked it once, carefully. Her 2 cubs lay down beside her without protest, as if understanding the moment. Nova responded to scent and sound. Her ears twitched toward Juniper's voice. Her tiny chest rose with more strength. When Juniper gave a final soft call, Nova let out a cry louder than any she had produced before. Isabel's voice cracked. She knows. Tears ran silently down Meredith's cheek. No medical procedure had done this. No stimulant. No machine. Just a mother's voice. When time was up, Juniper was gently led away. She didn't resist. She gave one final glance toward the incubator, then exited the room with regal calm. Nova, now exhausted, fell into a deep, steady sleep. Her vitals normalized. Her temperature remained consistent. Muscle tremors slowed. In the observation room, Meredith closed her journal and simply wrote, Day 7, first reunion. Response exceeds all expectation. Proceed with daily sessions. The next reunion was longer, then longer still. By day 14, Nova could spend brief, supervised moments outside the incubator, nestled against a warmed cloth in her mother's presence. Juniper treated her gently, almost reverently. Soon, Nova began trying to crawl. Wobbly, determined. Her siblings would gather around and watch, but none interfered. Calvin Reeves observed them from a high perch and noted, "The family adapts to Nova's presence, behaviorally accommodating, protective. This is not just maternal instinct. This is social adaptation." And so, the reunions continued. With each one, Nova grew stronger, and the world began to watch. The image was simple: a palm, gloved in white latex, holding a kitten the size of a hummingbird. The caption read, 62 grams, 7 days old. Her name is Nova. By sunrise, it had been shared over 3 million times. Redwood Hollow's quiet forest sanctuary was never meant to be famous. Tucked between rugged hills and redwood groves, it had served local wildlife in relative obscurity for 18 years. But the world doesn't always follow quiet plans. After Nova's first reunion with Juniper, Meredith had allowed one photo to be shared. Just one. It was meant to be a modest fundraiser for medical supplies. Instead, it triggered a tidal wave. Suddenly, the Redwood team wasn't just staff. They were a movement. Dr. Meredith Lane was now answering calls from National Geographic, BBC Wildlife, and pediatric hospitals, asking for cross-species neonatal data. Lucas Taylor, once a quiet technician, was coordinating shipments of infant-grade monitors from manufacturers in Boston and Toronto. Isabel Yoon was contacted by a university ethics board wanting to understand the behavioral implications of maternal memory in wild carnivores. And Nova, she became the face of every story about resilience that week. Her little face appeared beside headlines like, "Tiny Fighter Inspires Global Hope. When nature doesn't give up, neither should we." But with attention came pressure. Meredith faced a dilemma. Keep Nova's care private and clinical, or open Redwood Hollow to the world. Some warned that publicity would endanger Nova's peace and development. Others believed her story could save thousands, if not human lives, then endangered ones like hers. And Juniper? She grew uneasy with increased human traffic near the enclosures. Her stress levels spiked. She began hiding her cubs more often. Nova, now nearly 200 grams, was growing stronger, but was her world becoming too loud? To balance both worlds, Redwood created a controlled observation program. Media teams were invited with strict rules. No flash photography. No sudden movements. All filming behind one-way glass. A small room near the ICU became the Nova Room. There, families of premature children, children with chronic illness, and animal lovers alike gathered to watch live-streamed footage of Nova's progress. Meredith gave weekly updates. Lucas wrote a blog that included daily feeding charts. Isabel launched an education series on animal empathy. The hashtag #NovaRises hit 12 million views in 1 week. At the end of week 6, Nova stood on her own. For 5 shaky seconds, she balanced on her feet, fur still thin, eyes wide, heart thumping. A surveillance camera caught the moment. The footage was posted. Within 48 hours, it had 22 million views. One comment, from a woman undergoing chemotherapy, read, "If Nova can stand, so can I." A children's hospital in Chicago played the clip on repeat in their NICU. Parents whispered, "Look, sweetie, she's fighting just like you." That day, Meredith received over 400 emails. Nova had become more than a kitten. She was a symbol. By the end of the 2nd month, Nova spent nearly all day in the den with Juniper and her siblings. She played gently, observed more than pounced, but she was learning. The siblings, once boisterous, now displayed what researchers called adaptive empathy. They played more softly around Nova. One male cub even curled around her during rest periods, guarding her fragile body. Calvin Reeves published a paper titled Social Intelligence in Lynx Rufus, the Nova Phenomenon. The scientific world began calling it the Nova Protocol, a model for cross-species neonatal care and social reintroduction. Donations flooded in. With international support, Redwood Hollow expanded. The vet wing was renamed the Nova Center for Wildlife Recovery. And in a quiet break room at the edge of the sanctuary, cards from children began to fill an entire wall. Crayon drawings, letters in shaky handwriting, notes like, "Dear Nova, I'm small too, but I'm not scared anymore." Every evening, volunteers read those letters aloud to Nova as she dozed in Juniper's fur. Soon, the world would send more than letters. It would send change. At dawn, a young bobcat stood poised atop a rock ledge, silhouetted against the morning sky. Her body was still smaller than her siblings, but her stance was fearless. Her name was Nova, and 1 year ago, she fit into a single palm. The Redwood Hollow Wildlife Sanctuary no longer resembled the quiet, remote facility it once was. It had grown into the Nova Center for Wildlife Research and Recovery, a place where science, compassion, and public hope came together. Its new enclosures mimicked natural forest habitats with flowing water, climbable trees, and hidden shelters. A special education wing had been added, along with research labs and quiet rooms for visiting families of premature infants. On the outside, it was still forest, but inside, it had become a global center of healing and learning. Nova, now 12 months old, moved with grace. She was still smaller, still less muscular than her siblings, but her balance, speed, and awareness matched any of them. In play, she often led the games, her intelligence compensating for size. Juniper remained ever watchful, aged now, but proud. She often lay on high ledges, eyes half closed, while her cubs roamed. Dr. Meredith Lane, once hesitant to even hope, now led the Nova Center's international research team. Lucas Taylor became head of neonatal animal care training. Isabel Yoon published a book titled The Language of Juniper, now required reading in several veterinary programs across North America. As Nova grew, so did her legacy. But the sanctuary team faced a difficult decision. What would Nova's future look like? Should she remain in the sanctuary permanently? Or, after recovery, could she be released into the wild? Debate rippled through the staff and global community. Some believed releasing her would honor her wild roots. Others insisted she had become more than a bobcat. She was a symbol, a bridge between species, and her presence at Redwood inspired millions. Meanwhile, requests from hospitals, schools, and conservation centers poured in. Help us build our own Nova model. Could they scale Nova's miracle to help others? They began with hospitals. A children's hospital in Chicago redesigned its neonatal ICU to mirror Nova's incubator system, combining warmth, scent-based connection, and real-time family interaction. The model showed a 23% improvement in recovery rates within 6 months. A research team in Kenya adapted the Nova protocol for rescued cheetah cubs. A veterinarian in Vietnam applied it to sun bear orphans. And in Guatemala, a field clinic reported 17 infant howler monkeys saved using scent imprinting from the Nova playbook. Nova's story, once just a fragile heartbeat, was now guiding a global transformation in neonatal care across species. On the anniversary of Nova's birth, Redwood hosted its first global symposium, Hope Across Species. Delegates from 31 countries attended: pediatricians, conservationists, neuroscientists, school teachers, animal behaviorists. Meredith stood before the crowd and presented a side-by-side photo. Left, Nova in her palm on day 1. Right, Nova on her ledge today, alert, bright-eyed, whole. She spoke simply. This is not just about saving one life, it's about changing how we think about all lives, human or animal, wild or weak. Hope is not passive, it's active. It's a choice. The hall rose in applause. Nova would stay at Redwood. Not as a pet, not as a mascot, but as a living, learning creature among her own kind. Every few months, small groups of children, especially those recovering from illness, would be allowed to observe her quietly from a hidden viewing room. They would watch as she climbed trees, leapt over logs, and nuzzled her siblings. Nova would never know how many people she had touched, but her presence continued to ripple across the world. More than 3,000 schools adopted the Nova Resilience curriculum, a social-emotional learning module teaching compassion, patience, and perseverance. And in remote clinics around the globe, infants now survived because someone believed, because Nova had lived. In a quiet room at Redwood, a wall of letters, now called the Heartline, held over 5,000 messages from children, patients, and families. Every evening, volunteers still read them aloud. One card read, "Dear Nova, I was born too early too. My mom says we're both miracles. Thank you for showing me it's okay to be small and strong." One evening, as twilight painted the sanctuary in golden light, Nova stood on her favorite perch. She looked out toward the trees, ears flicking, body still. To the world, she was a miracle. To herself, she was simply a bobcat, living, moving, free. But to everyone watching, she was proof that hope, once given life, can change the world.